Good morning, everyone. My name is Dabo Guan. I'm a climate change economist working at the University of East Anglia. I'm glad to share my thoughts and my work over the last 10 years on Chinese emission growth. The first thing I want to show you is the drivers of the Chinese emission growth. Over 1981 to 2002, Chinese emission grew twice. There's two strong drivers drive this emission growth, which is the consumption, per capita consumptions, and efficiency gains. There's a racing game between the consumptions and technology. This is very important for the policymakers. Who is going to win in the future? Either the consumption or technology is very, very important. Let's solve this problem in a few minutes. After 2002, in recent years, there's a new driver coming into the game, which is the production structure. Chinese economy, since they joined WTO, become more carbonized because they produce more capital investment products as well as for the export. Their economy become a much more emission intensive. So this production structure become one of the important drivers together with consumptions and the technology gains. If we attribute those emissions from the consumption perspective, Chinese emissions is actually driven by three pillars. One is capital investment, the second is export, and the third is the household consumption. Let's take export as an example. China is a world manufacturer, so they produce for the world. I'm pretty sure all of you have at least one or two items in your body or in your hand is made in China. In 2004, 1.4 gigatons of CO2 emission embodied in Chinese export. 1/3 of that emissions is triggered by the US consumption. Another 1/3 is triggered by the European 27s. 1/4 is triggered by Japan and Australia. So overall, 60% of CO2 emissions embodied in Chinese emissions is because of our consumption in the OECD countries. And so this is question, is the producers poor or the poor workers in China should bear or take the responsibility to reduce the emissions, or the rich consumers in OECD countries should do that? When we look at the Chinese emissions, we look at their statistic. This is very important because before we talk about any emission target, including carbon intensity target or the absolute emission reduction target, we should know our baselines. But unfortunately, Chinese energy statistic or the emission inventory has a huge uncertainties. As the latest research we got 2 years ago, it shows that Chinese emission inventory has a 20% uncertainty range, which is 1.4 gigatons emissions, which is equivalent to 5% of global total. We need to know this, we need to get this right before we talk about the absolute emission reduction target. Let's go back to the racing game. Let's do some extreme scenarios. Let's say if we focus on consumption and technologies. If we focus on consumptions, let's say every urban Chinese will adopt US lifestyles, China's emissions is going to grow 3 times from the current levels. There's going to be a disaster. But if we very optimistic on the technologies, let's say every newly built power plants in China is going to have a carbon capture and storage features on that. It's not realistic, but let's say they have it. The Chinese emission in 2030 will be 6 gigatons, which is similar to the US emission. That means China cannot offer any emission reduction scheme like what the OECD country did in the Kyoto Protocol, reduce something below the 1990s level. Let's look at the Chinese emissions at the regional level. The poor provinces like Inner Mongolia and Ningxia, they have the highest per capita CO2 emissions because they are heavily industrialized by high emission products like cements and the steel industry and the power plants. They have those heavy industries not for themselves, but not only for themselves, but also for other countries in other cities, other regions in China. Those goods and services flow to the rich coastal regions, and those 3 provinces on the east coast is actually produced for the world. I have a few comments about the next in Paris negotiations. Firstly, the consumption emission mitigation can potentially distribute emission reduction responsibilities in terms of the rich and poor distinctions. China should be able to already commit some of the emission caps, maybe not as a country as a whole, but some rich regions like Shanghai, Beijing, they should be able to apply some emission caps already. Domestic emission trading scheme in China can link with the European ETS and to make it a new and to prevent the further carbon leakage. Chinese CO2 emission reduction can be a co-benefits product of the already large-scale investment on air pollution, mitigation, Clean Air Act, and these type of things. Finally, I want to say a few words about the emission peak in China. China very recently just said they are going to peak their emission in 2030. What I really care about is when the global emission is going to peak. It's not about the Chinese emission peak, because if we don't change our production and consumption patterns, when China's emission peak, we are going to have another emission giant like India, Latin American countries, or even Africa to replace China. China already spent 20 years' time to experience a deep learning curve on the efficiency gain in their productions. Will take another 10, 20, or even 30 years for India to adopt the same level as the Chinese does if we outsource our emissions from China further to Indian or even American countries. I'm done. Thank you.